This is Conversations with Women in Sales, an award-winning podcast created by Barbara Giamanco, who hosted the first 67 episodes. Listen to interviews with amazing women about their journeys in their sales careers, often discussing sales leadership tips, ideas, and strategies. We aim to inspire women to consider a sales career and for some women to grow into sales leadership. Men, we appreciate your allyship. And now, your host, Lori Richardson.
I'm joined today by Kristie Jones. Kristie and I have known each other for quite some time. She is founder and principal of the Sales Acceleration Group. And it's so great to have you here, Kristie. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Lori. Happy New Year.
Yeah, you too. You too. And this is a time of year when people are trying to figure it out. And I talked to a sales leader the other day that said, we're ending another year poorly and we're looking for ideas for next year. I know he's not alone. And we're going to talk about that and maybe about what sales reps need to do themselves to be successful. But before that, I want to go back to you went to KU, which is University of Kansas. I know you're a big alum, big sports fan, and you guys so well. What got you into sales after school?
Yeah, interesting. I actually think I got into sales before college. I say affectionately that I got my MBA at the kitchen table because my parents owned a real estate company and my father was the owner broker of the Coldwell Banker franchise that we owned. And my mother was a top agent in town. And so our entire dinner conversations revolved around commission checks and out of town buyers. Money was a super transparent topic in my family, which is not the case with some, but I knew exactly what every commission check my mother was cashing was. I knew when my dad wasn't taking a salary so he could pay my mother's quarterly taxes or to make payroll. And so I think it's not surprising. My brother is a very successful individual contributor, and I went down my dad's path as a sales leader, but not surprising at all. That really was my first foray into sales. And then my first real sales job is still my favorite sales job to this day, which is waiting tables.
I did that too.
I took to that right away. I loved that. I loved the instant gratification of feedback. Unlike having to wait for your annual review or your quarterly review or whatever it would be, every time a table left and turned over and left a tip on the table, I got an instant grade card. So I love that. And I think waiting tables, as I call it, is personality packed.
Was that back
personality?
Was it like me that it was back when you didn't have to share the tips with other people, or did you?
No, we didn't share tips.
I didn't either. It was all mine. And however, as good as I did. And you learn some little tricks and nuances and handing people a pen and maybe giving them candies afterwards. There's a lot to it for sure.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of lessons there for sure that were learned. And I can make very distinctive parallels between certain types of things. Like you said, I tell people, I said, when you think that territory matters, the same thing was in waiting tables. The section you were assigned each night mattered. Getting along with your coworkers mattered because the managers assigned those sections.
Even the nights of the week that you worked. That was very important.
That's right. Your schedule mattered. Your section mattered. Knowing your product mattered, right? Which salads had nuts in them, which didn't. What was the specials of the night? How was it prepared? There were so many things that now looking back, I never really intended to go into sales. But I'm looking back, I'm like, there were a lot of lessons that were acquired there between ages 16 and 22.
Yeah, that's how I put myself through school, actually.
Yeah, it was very lucrative.
Yeah, I worked at a place called the Pepper Mill restaurant where they sold pepper mills.
Nice.
And they made pies and they were known for that, but it was really fun. That's great. So then after waitressing, did you say, you know what, my folks have done sales successfully, I should look for that kind of a career, or did it just happen?
I really didn't. The honest truth is I have a journalism degree and I have a public relations degree, and I always thought I would do that. And then the money was just so horrible. I was like, this sounds crazy because this is how old we are, but I think $17,000 out of school was what that was paying. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. That doesn't sound like a lot of money. And the only people, like I used the business school. I had my degree in public relations, which really is business communication. So I had a little bit of a dual degree out of the business school and the journalism school. But the only interviews I was getting, the corporations would come on campus and interview. And the only people that were really there at the end were Kmart, which I'm glad I didn't make that decision. And a company, another retailer out of the Midwest called the Jones Store, which is now Macy's. And it was really funny, like something about my background, maybe waitressing, my resume, but the only people left at the end of the day, and to make one of those two decisions. And the only reason I chose the joint store company as opposed to Kmart was the regional who wanted to hire me for Kmart. His region was from North Dakota down to Texas and over to Louisiana, and you could be placed anywhere.
Wow. Wow. That is so
Yeah. So at least I knew I would end up in the Midwest near family, but I thought, knowing my luck, I'm going to end up in North Dakota, working at the Kmart in North Dakota.
Oh, wow. So you did sales for a number of years and sales leadership, and then you launched your own company about 8 years ago.
Yep, in 2016.
Yeah, that's great. What prompted you to do that? Because now it's very fashionable, but I don't think
Yes.
8 years ago, was it?
No, it wasn't very fashionable, but it was, again, I say the universe conspired to make that happen for me. The very first thing that happened is I lost my job at a very successful company that I was very happy at. And again, it's not as vogue today, but it was definitely still an ongoing debate. But I built an SDR team from 0 to 13. So as a sales leader, you hardly ever get a chance to build a team from zero, from scratch. So I had done that. But over time, I figured out that we probably needed to be under the marketing umbrella as opposed to the sales umbrella. The VP of sales was out of San Francisco. And again, the company was a very successful, fast moving startup. And the marketing team was out of Phoenix. The CMO was out of Phoenix. And I was starting to spend more and more time with him and his team. I started attending their weekly meetings. And I had been vocal about the fact that the team should probably be under the marketing umbrella. And sure enough, my VP of sales flew in one night in December and told me that my wish had come true, except that they were going to be disbanding the team in St. Louis. Some of my employees would be let go. Some of them would be able to interview for other jobs. I would not have a job when it was all said and done, when they were going to rebuild the team from scratch in Phoenix. So, yeah. So like you say a little bit, these kind of things are the mother of invention. But I still at that point, Lori, did not have any intention of going in and starting my own business. In fact, I'd seen the toll it had taken on my parents. My dad had bypass surgery at 54. My mom was stressed. Like I had seen the toll that owning your own business could take on a family. And so I really had been open about saying that was never going to be my path.
Interesting.
But as
Not
I
all
started,
upside watching that.
yeah, all kinds of we owned the building that our office was in. It had a fire. My dad's secretary embezzled money from, it was just like, it was a bunch of really bad things for a very small business to undertake.
Wow.
Not to mention it was the real estate industry. And so
Yeah.
some years were great and some years
Yeah.
were awful.
Yeah.
There was no consistency in that. So I had just seen the good and the really awful of owning your own business.
Mhm.
But as I went out looking for my next sales leadership role, a bunch of weird things happened. I said it conspired to put me where I am today. But really, it was the opportunity after talking to a general partner at one of the largest VCs here in Missouri, who asked me if I would just have coffee with a new founder they just invested. It was a cybersecurity company, and he didn't have a sales team and needed to build one out. And the general partner asked me if I'd just have coffee with him and give him some advice. And at the end of 2 hours, he said, "This was amazing, and I am not capable of doing anything you just told me needed to be done." And he said, "Who do you know that can help me do this?" And before I could even stop myself, I said, "I can." And that became client number one. And then I was interviewing with a husband and wife team at a SaaS fintech company. And I called them and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to be doing this instead of that. And by the way, you should probably be a client. I could be a fractional sales leader." They only had 2 AEs and 1 SDR. And they said, "No, thank you. We want a full-time VP of sales." I said, "No problem. Good luck." But a week later, the husband called me and asked if I would meet with a local consultant that they had been working with. And I said, "Sure. Who's your consultant?" He said, "Mike Weinberg." "Oh, okay, that guy." I go, I knew he lived in St. Louis and I had been reading his books, and so had my employees, but I had not ever met him in person. Again, because Mike is one of the most generous humans on the planet. And
Shout out to Mike Weinberg. Mike,
shout out to Mike Weinberg, being an amazing human.
We love you.
Yes. He met me for breakfast and was like, "This is totally what should happen. Like, they need your help, and you're right. They don't need a full-time VP of sales." And I said, "Yeah, I think they really want one." He goes, "Leave it to me. I will take care of it." And true to his word,
Wow.
a day later, the owner called and said, "Why don't you come on in and let's hammer out the details?" And Mike mentored me through my first year, has written the forward of my upcoming book.
Wow.
So he has been like a big cheerleader for me. But it was a bunch of little things like that. The third client came through a happenstance of a guy I hadn't talked to in a couple of years, who had been a partner at a e-learning company I had been the sales leader for, reached out and just said, "Business isn't going that well. Can you come and look under the hood and see what might be amiss?" And at the end of that, he said, I think I should not be running the sales team and you should fractionally. So before I ever actually left the company, before my last day at the company I was being let go from, I had 3 clients.
And you're like, bye-bye.
Yeah. Never. And this is not, when people call me to talk about my founder story, I said, you're not going to like it because it
Yes.
wasn't not the typical hustle story. It's really not. But I don't think I'm lucky. My motto is do the right things and the right things will happen. And
Yeah.
I think throughout my life up until that point, I had been doing the right things. And I think that all came back to me tenfold.
Yeah. And good sellers and good leaders, we see patterns and you start seeing, wait a minute, this is happening. This is happening. Hey, I could pull this thing together.
Yep.
Really amazing.
I said when the universe speaks, you should listen. And I was definitely
Yes.
paying attention.
Don't just ignore it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's great. And now I'm so excited because you have put a book together that's going to be coming out soon,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
it's going to be coming out in 2024
Yep.
and later in the year. And we'll make sure we do it. We'll do an update episode about that.
Perfect.
But tell us a little bit about selling your way in. And you have a newsletter now that people could get on in the meantime, right?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I have a newsletter of the same name on LinkedIn. So please go sign up for my Selling Your Way In newsletter. That comes out weekly on Wednesdays. So you can definitely get some tips every week from me on that. I really didn't want to put a how-to book together. And actually, this is a shout out to Barbara Weaver Smith, who did some tough love and tough talk with me at my very first shebang in 2019 through the
Love
Women's
her
Sales
too.
Pro event. Literally walking to lunch with her in my first half day, which was overwhelming. And she was like, how you doing? And I was like, I'm freaked out. And that morning you had hosted a book panel of authors,
Right.
including Andrea Waltz and Jill
So good.
Conrath and some
Trish.
of the heavy hitters.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to speak. I want to do keynotes and I want to do breakout sessions and I want to be a speaker. And she's, have you written a book? And I'm like, no. And she's, you're going to have to write a book. And I said, I don't want to write a book. I said, I got shit to say and I don't want to have to write a book to do it. And she goes, I'm sorry, this is how it's done. And so, yeah, during a little after pandemic in 2021, her advice never left my mind. But I didn't want to write a how-to. I think there are lots of people out there doing that. And I think there are lots of people out there writing how-to books about topics that I am not an expert in. But I think what I wanted to do is I walk into so many, as somebody who spends a lot of time in the SaaS startup world, I walk in and see a lot of people who have been put in the wrong position, sales role, or have put themselves in the wrong sales role. And so I think a lot of people are leaving income on the table. My hashtag own your own income really comes from the fact that if you know who you are and what makes you tick, how do you like to be compensated, what your strengths are, what your sales superpower and secret weapons are, if you understand all of that, then you can put yourself in the right role, in the right company, with the right boss, in the right industry, selling the right product or service. But that's a lot to ask of people, right? That's a lot to ask people to figure that out on their own.
Yeah.
And so I really wrote the book so that the first is it's 3 sections. And the first one really is know yourself. And it's titled, You Have to Know Yourself Before You Can Know the Prospect.
And that's such a big part of being successful.
It is. And I see so many people who don't even really understand that just because you can hunt doesn't mean that's how you're going to maximize your career. And so everybody thinks the hunter is such a glamorous job. But if you're only getting 60% of quota as a hunter, not only is it not glamorous for you, like it's not financially, feasible for you to get to the top 10% under that circumstance. I wanted to write a book where I could help people who were thinking about going into sales, but also I call it like the other 90%, the people that haven't found their way to the top and don't know why. The people that I always use this analogy. Jill's sitting next to Sarah and she's saying everything that Sarah's saying, but Sarah's in the top 10% and she's not. There are reasons why that's the case. And it's not just saying what Sarah says and the way that Sarah says it. And so I wanted to write a book about that, about how to find your right niche within sales, and then how to leverage your sales superpower and your secret weapons in order to make your way to the top.
Yeah, that's great. And I do talk to a lot of different women who are struggling in sales, or it's their first sales role and they're in a very male majority environment. And they don't like that part of it. But I feel like there's so many different ways to be successful in sales. Like you're saying, there's so many different roles and there are different ways and different products and services. Sometimes it's just sometimes it's just bad management,
That's
bad
right.
leadership. So you really do. So
That's right.
I'm glad that you address all those different things, because those are the things you need to think about before you decide to get out of such a great, I think it's like the best industry to be in, because you can determine so many aspects of your, like you said, your income, where you want to live, what you want to do, who you want to be around, so many different things, and meet so many interesting people from all different companies and industries. That's what I love about sales. So that's great. So what should the top 10% be doing that's different from the 90%?
Yeah, I think some of it, once you figure the first part out, you have to put yourself in the right position. And then you have to take the right step. I call them step changes. So when I look a resume over, I'm looking for what I call the right step changes at the right time. Again, God love the zillennials, as I affectionately call them, the Gen Z and the millennials. They're not going to be around for 24 months. And so particularly if you're reading my book and you're in that age range, the millennial and the Gen Zers, like every time you take a new job, you need to be strategic about that. Again, like you said, is it for better leadership? Is it for better product? Is it in a thriving industry? What would it be that would cause you to leave? I don't think people spend enough time thinking about that.
Yeah.
About, is this, again, your career is a chessboard, right? And every move that you make is a step change in your career. So are you making the right moves at the right times for the right reasons? And by the way, it's not like shouldn't always be the right reason or the reason, because sometimes that interim job, where I'll use myself as an example, I took a step change that, by the way, I realized right away was not the right step change for me, but I needed to check off international on my resume. I had never managed anything internationally. And I got an opportunity to leave SaaS and go work for a holistic pet food company and be their inside sales leader and manage Canada. And I really wanted to be able to check that box on my resume, even though it was Canada and not EMEA. But I took that job for that reason. 10 months later, though, I realized that I had made a wrong step change and that the dog and cat food wasn't sexy. I didn't like it. I didn't like CPG. It was a distribution model. I didn't like that. And so 10 months later, the other thing is I knew myself well enough and I had enough self-awareness around the situation and me personally. Like, the company didn't think I was a bad fit, by the way. I knew I was a bad fit. And you will always know that you're the wrong fit way before the company will probably know that you're the wrong fit, if you're really being honest with yourself. And so 10 months later, I got out of that situation and had checked the box I needed to, probably not as long as I needed to check it for, but I'm like, this is going to set my career back. This wasn't going to help me. This was going to hinder me. And so I got out of that situation. So I think once you've recognized that, the other things that are really important are what I call the intrinsic things. So again, the example I just gave, I'm saying everything she's saying, but I'm not getting the result. What is she doing outside of work? Because my motto is the top 10 percenters, they're doing the work outside of work that causes them to get to the top. And for me, that means getting enough sleep, exercising, the mental, the physical, and the spiritual side of things, doing the practicing, right? As an athlete growing up, I use an example of one summer I decided I play tennis and I grew up playing racquetball. So I have a natural slice, forehand and backhand. But over time, the players that I played started to figure me out. At first, it was a complete secret weapon. They didn't even know what to do with it because it was such an unusual shot for someone who didn't grow up in Europe playing tennis. And so one summer I decided I wanted to learn topspin. So I hired a coach, but for every hour I spent with the coach, I spent 3 hours a week on my own at a 2-story brick wall practicing my topspin so that I could make muscle memory around it, because the only muscle memory I had was my slice. And so I had to create new muscle memory, and that takes hours. Creating muscle memory takes hours. And so I make the leap over to business and say, how are you creating mental memory? How are you practicing something to the point where it's automatic? Right? When you get this objection, you automatically ask these type of questions. When you get into a negotiation situation, you automatically take this strategy or path that you know has worked for you in the past. I use another example. How many of you are practicing your demos so that you can get to where you're only talking 50% of the time? It's so interactive.
Yeah. Yeah.
The top 10 percenters are doing those things, right? They're not watching The Bachelor, they're reading a business book. They're getting up in the morning. The majority, if you look at the top, just take the top Fortune 500 CEOs and what their daily routine is.
Yeah.
And almost all of them, to a fault, started at the gym, right? They may have to set their alarm for 4 or 4:30 or 5, but they're starting their day with exercise, right? And they're probably not putting candy, refined food, sugars, all that stuff they're probably not alcoholics probably not excessively drinking. They're probably not. They understand the mind-body connection is so strong.
Yeah.
And I think I ask a question every time I interview a candidate, and this is the question. So if you ever interview with me, be prepared. What are 3 things that you do consistently, regardless of the job or the role that you're in, that you truly believe make you successful?
That's a
And
great.
I know I'm interviewing a top 10 percenter when I hear I have a spiritual practice, I go to church on Sundays, I start my day at the gym, I try to only eat whole foods, I put my phone down for 2 hours a night so I can be present with my family, I try to limit my social media. Those are the things that I hear, and I immediately know I'm talking to a 10 percenter.
Plus, I work on professional development.
I read books, I listen to podcasts, I follow another question I ask is, who do you follow?
Yeah.
And tell me what you've learned from that person. Who do you follow, and what's one thing you've taken away from them? Because you're right, top 10 percenters are lifelong learners.
Oh, that's great. This is all fantastic. I'm excited for you and the journey that you're on in terms of getting that book out to the world. And in the meantime, you're going to share lots of great stuff through your all the posts that you're going to do weekly on Wednesdays, right?
Yeah. You should definitely follow me on LinkedIn, but then also sign up for my newsletter. So I'm a regular poster on LinkedIn. I've also got Instagram and YouTube, but I'm most active on LinkedIn. And then, yes, I've got the Wednesday newsletter that comes out, same
Yeah.
name as the book.
And click on the bell. Like you can click on mine too. If you
on the
click
bell
on someone's bell, then you get alerted to when they have new posts out. And that's really helpful. And I still find people who don't know that. Putting that out there to the audience and also to the women in sales and sales leadership. And we have a lot of men who listen as well. Think about a book. Think about doing your own book. At least what would the outline be? And what do you want? Now we're going into a new year. We've started a new year. What are you going to do this year that's going to be different? I'm a big goal setter, and I think you probably are too, Kristie, right? Are you?
Yep, you got it.
Yeah.
You got to write it down.
Yeah, you got to write it down, you got to look at it, put it up on your wall, and do something. If you're not happy with what happened last year, what are you going to do differently? If you are happy, what are you going to keep doing that worked really well?
Lori, I want to play off that because we say that, but here's what I really say to people is, where's your brag book? Because we use the word postmortem all the time. We need to postmortem that deal, but we only do that when it goes to hell.
Yeah.
Right? We only do that when it's closed lost. And I always say to people, I said, when things like everybody goes through slumps, athletes alike. And so I say to them, like, when you have an amazing month or you close a really big deal, you need to take some quiet time and go write down and keep it in a Word doc or Google Doc or whatever you want to do. But when things are really great, nobody writes it down.
Yeah.
Nobody writes down the things that cause that great month or that great quarter or to close that big deal. Because when you're struggling and in a slump, you need that book to go back to so that because again, like habits form fast, but they also go away fast.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's just been 3 or 4 months and all of a sudden you hit a slump and you're like, what? I don't know what happened. January was so great. What's going on with June? That you need to be able to go back to something and go, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. That just slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
So I think as usual, as particularly women, right? We are so
Right.
hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
We very rarely will write down anything good. All we want to talk about is the bad, right?
What didn't work. Yeah. And why?
So particularly as women, we need to write down why things worked. What was good about that? What strategy worked? What was I doing consistently from an activity perspective? Because we are the hardest on ourselves. And so you need something positive to go back to.
Yeah. And newer in a sales role or sales leadership role, you're not going to have wins every single day. You're not going to close business every day. So what's a win at the end of the day that
I love that.
happened? Did you reach a buyer that you haven't been able to get for months or no one else could? That's a big win. And you need to be looking at those too, because I think that is very inspirational to motivate you to keep going, especially if you're in an environment that isn't particularly supportive. So you need to motivate yourself and find ways to do that. And by thinking of all the wins and not just the dollar wins, because those are great. We need those. But all the other things that happen along the way are super important. That's great. Is there a podcast or book that you've read recently that you would recommend to our readers until yours comes out, of course?
Yes, of course. Yes, actually, during Thanksgiving, I'm not as much a reader as I am an Audible girl. The little book of affirmations, not affirmations, but affirmations. And it's a very quick listen, so which means it has to be a quick read, right? So I think it was
Yeah.
35 or 40 minutes. I would hate to give away the punchline, but it involves the word why.
Oh.
Changing your mindset to involve the word why. I will leave you with that little tidbit. But check that out, because that was game changing for me. And I've always been an affirmation girl. I say those every morning. I'm very deliberate about doing that. By the way, that's what top 10%ers do. Positive self-talk and affirmations and visualization are on the top 10%er list.
Yeah.
But I have changed from doing out loud affirmations to out loud afformations as a result of listening to this book.
Perfect. I'm going to check that out. That's really great.
Yep.
Appreciate that so much. Kristie Jones, follow her on LinkedIn, right?
Yep, please.
Best place to follow you?
Really is. Yeah. From there, you can find me on Instagram and YouTube. But if you start there under the contact info, you'll find all the other things.
All right. Thank you so much, Kristie. And
Thanks, Lori.
continued success. And here's to a big 2024 for all of our listeners.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conversations with Women in Sales. You can find all of our episodes at womensalespros.com/podcast. Help us spread the word, and let's change the face of B2B sales.